Millionaire sees a beggar with 2 children and recognizes her. What he did leaves everyone shocked. The cold wind swept through the busy streets of the city, where the hum of engines and the clamor of hurried footsteps painted a symphony of urban life. Amid the chaos, a man in a tailored navy suit, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, stepped out of a sleek black car. His name was Ethan Caldwell, a self-made millionaire whose name resonated in the corporate world. Ethan exuded confidence, his sharp eyes constantly scanning the world around him. He had come a long way from the small town where he'd grown up, and life had rewarded his determination with unimaginable wealth. As Ethan walked toward the entrance of an exclusive restaurant, he paused. Something unusual caught his eye, a woman sitting on the sidewalk, clutching 2 small children close to her. Her clothes were tattered, her hair a tangled mess, and her face bore the weary lines of hardship. Her children, barely older than toddlers, huddled against her for warmth, their eyes wide and hollow with hunger. The sight of the trio struck Ethan, but it wasn't just their pitiable state. He froze, his breath hitching. That face, though gaunt and weary, was achingly familiar. "Is that?" he whispered to himself, his voice trailing off in disbelief. It was her. Sophia Winters. The girl who had once been the light of his life, the one who'd sat beside him in high school classrooms and laughed at his terrible jokes. They'd shared dreams of escaping their small town, of conquering the world together. But life had a cruel way of pulling people apart. A misunderstanding, a shattered promise, and years of silence had severed their connection. Ethan's world tilted as memories surged like a tidal wave. He had left everything behind, including her, but seeing Sophia like this was a jarring reminder of the fragile threads that connected people's lives. His hesitation drew the attention of the restaurant's doorman, who gestured for Ethan to step inside. But Ethan raised a hand, signaling him to wait. He couldn't just walk away. His heart, armored by years of business battles, cracked open as he looked at the woman he had once loved, now reduced to begging on the street. Taking a deep breath, Ethan approached her, his heart pounding. He crouched down, his gaze searching hers. "Sophia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Her head lifted slowly, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, there was no recognition in her gaze, just a weary resignation. Then, as if struck by lightning, her eyes widened. "Ethan," she rasped, her voice hoarse and trembling. Ethan's mind raced as he took in the frail figure of the woman who had once been so full of life. The children clung to her, their tiny hands clutching her threadbare coat. His heart ached for answers, for understanding. What happened to you?" he asked, struggling to keep his composure. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head, as if refusing to relive the pain. "It's a long story," she said, her voice breaking. Ethan couldn't ignore the pang in his chest. The woman he had once dreamed of building a future with was now fighting to survive. He glanced at the children, their innocent faces etched with suffering, and felt a surge of determination. Without another word, Ethan stood and extended his hand. "Come with me," he said firmly. Sophia hesitated, fear and confusion clouding her expression. I can't just leave," she stammered. "Yes, you can," Ethan said, his voice steady but insistent. "You and your kids. You're coming with me." The shock on Sophia's face was mirrored by the passers-by who stopped to gawk. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Ethan Caldwell, the untouchable tycoon, helped a beggar to her feet and guided her toward his car. The 2 children clung to their mother, unsure of what was happening but sensing the promise of something better. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind a stunned audience, Ethan couldn't help but wonder how fate had led them to this moment. He didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear. He wouldn't rest until he knew Sophia's story, and until she and her children were safe. The journey had only just begun. Inside the sleek, temperature-controlled car, an uneasy silence settled. Sophia sat stiffly, her children clinging to her like vines to a tree. She stared out of the window, her mind racing with uncertainty and questions. Meanwhile, Ethan sat beside her, his thoughts turbulent as he tried to process what he had seen. The memory of the vibrant, ambitious Sophia he once knew clashed painfully with the image of the broken woman before him. Ethan broke the silence first. "Sophia," he said softly, his voice laden with a mix of guilt and concern, "please, Tell me what happened. How did you end up? He gestured vaguely, unable to say the word here as if it were a curse. Sophia turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and exhaustion. It's complicated, she replied, her voice trembling. Life doesn't always turn out the way we plan, Ethan. You should know that. He nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. But I want to understand, he insisted gently. Whatever happened, you don't have to go through it alone anymore. Her lips parted as if to respond, but a soft whimper from one of the children interrupted her. The younger of the two, a little girl no older than 3, tugged at Sophia's sleeve. Mommy, I'm hungry, she whispered. Ethan's chest tightened at the sound. We'll get something to eat, he said quickly, his tone decisive. He turned to his driver. Take us to the nearest place where we can sit down. The car came to a stop outside a family-friendly diner a few minutes later. Ethan led them inside, drawing stares from other patrons as the impeccably dressed businessman helped a disheveled woman and her 2 children settle into a booth. The children's eyes widened at the sight of the colorful menus, and for the first time, Ethan saw a spark of joy in their faces. Sophia hesitated as Ethan ordered food for everyone, her pride warring with her desperation. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. We'll be fine. Ethan looked at her, his expression firm. You're not fine, Sophia. And I'm not going to pretend I didn't see what I saw today. The food arrived, and the children dug in with the eagerness of those who hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. Sophia watched them, her eyes brimming with a mix of relief and sadness. Ethan, observing her closely, finally asked, Where's their father? Her face hardened at the question, and she looked away. Gone, she said curtly. Left when things got hard. I don't even know where he is anymore. Ethan's jaw tightened, anger rising in him. He abandoned you, he asked, his voice sharp. Sophia nodded, her gaze dropping to the table. I tried to manage on my own, but things spiraled. I lost my job, then our home. I didn't have anyone to turn to. Ethan's heart sank. He couldn't imagine the strength it had taken for her to keep going. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. You have someone now, he said firmly. You and the kids. I'm not letting you go back to that. Sophia looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude but also fear. Why are you doing this, Ethan? After all these years, after everything that happened. Why? He hesitated, the weight of the past pressing down on him. Because I owe you, he admitted. And because I can't stand to see you suffer when I have the means to help. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. I don't know if I can accept this, she murmured. You don't have to decide right now, Ethan replied. But I'm going to help, whether you like it or not. By the time they left the diner, the children were smiling, their bellies full for the first time in days. Ethan led them back to his car, his mind already racing with plans. He didn't know exactly how he was going to fix everything, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let Sophia slip through his fingers again. As they drove toward his sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a journey that would change all their lives forever. The car pulled into the sweeping driveway of Ethan's estate, the sight of the grand mansion leaving Sophia visibly uneasy. The children, however, stared out of the windows in wide-eyed wonder. They had never seen anything like it. Towering marble columns, pristine gardens, and a fountain in the center of the circular drive that sparkled under the estate's ambient lighting. Ethan stepped out first and opened the door for Sophia. Come on, he said gently, offering his hand. She hesitated, her pride warring with her exhaustion, but ultimately, she allowed him to help her out. I don't think this is a good idea, Sophia said softly as she glanced at the opulence surrounding her. This isn't my world, Ethan. It never was. And yet, here you are, Ethan replied with a small, reassuring smile. You don't have to belong to it. Just let it help you get back on your feet. Sophia bit her lip and nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. The children clung to her hands, their gazes darting between Ethan and the grandeur around them. As they entered the mansion, a warm, inviting glow filled the foyer. The staff greeted Ethan with practiced professionalism but did a double take at the sight of his unexpected guests. Ethan, ever composed, ignored their curious glances and addressed the butler. "James, prepare the guest wing for Sophia and her children," he instructed. "They'll be staying indefinitely." James, though surprised, gave a polite nod. "Of course, sir." Sophia looked at Ethan, her brows furrowing. "Ethan, you can't just—" "I can," Ethan interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And I will." Before she could protest further, he turned to the children with a warm smile. "Do you like hot chocolate?" he asked. The little boy, the elder of the two, nodded hesitantly, while his sister hid shyly behind her mother's leg. Ethan knelt to their level. "We'll get you some. And after that, how about we find some comfy beds for you to sleep in? I think you deserve a good night's rest." The boy's eyes lit up, and he nodded again, this time with more enthusiasm. His sister peeked out, her curiosity slowly overcoming her shyness. Sophia, watching this exchange, felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. She still didn't know how to process what was happening, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. The guest wing was prepared with meticulous attention to detail, the rooms adorned with soft linens and plush furnishings. Ethan personally ensured that everything the children might need was provided: clothes, toys, and even storybooks. As he watched the children settle into their new surroundings, a pang of guilt struck him. How could he have let someone he once cared about suffer like this? That night, as the children slept soundly for the first time in weeks, Sophia found herself sitting alone on the balcony of her room. The view was breathtaking, the city lights twinkling in the distance like scattered diamonds. But her mind was too heavy for the beauty to soothe her. Ethan joined her, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. He handed one to her and leaned against the railing. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Too much on my mind." They stood in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "This is too much, Ethan. I can't let you do all of this for us." Ethan sighed. "Sophia, you're not taking advantage of me, if that's what you're worried about. This isn't charity. It's making up for lost time." "Lost time." She turned to him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Ethan, we lost time because you left. You went off to chase your dreams and never looked back." Her words hit like a slap, but Ethan didn't flinch. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant city lights. "You're right," he admitted. "I was selfish. I thought I had to leave everything behind to become the person I wanted to be. But seeing you today, it made me realize how much I left behind. How much I've missed." Sophia's expression softened, though the pain in her eyes remained. "It wasn't just you, Ethan. I made mistakes, too. I pushed you away when I should have fought harder to keep us together." They stood there, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I can't change the past, Sophia. But I can do something about the present. I can help you, and I want to help you. Not because I feel guilty, but because I care." Sophia stared at him, her emotions warring inside her. She wanted to trust him, to believe that he genuinely cared. But years of struggle and disappointment had built walls around her heart. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll stay. For now." Ethan nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. It wasn't a declaration of forgiveness or trust, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. Over the next few days, Ethan devoted himself to helping Sophia rebuild her life. He connected her with counselors and resources, ensured the children were enrolled in a good school, and even arranged for her to see a doctor to address her health concerns. Slowly, Sophia began to open up, sharing bits and pieces of the hardships she had endured. Ethan, in turn, began to reflect on his own life. He realized how empty his wealth and success had felt without meaningful connections. Helping Sophia and her children gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. But as the days turned into weeks, new challenges emerged. The scars of their past and the uncertainties of their future threatened to pull them apart once again. Both Ethan and Sophia would have to confront not only their individual demons but also the unresolved feelings between them. It was clear that their journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning.